Ever get a gift you knew was like a little too thoughtful? Suspiciously thoughtful?
I know where you're going with this.
Today we're diving into that kind of envy. The kind that doesn't want what you have, it wants to take it. Sometimes, literally.
Envy, the original frenemy.
We're talking evolution, the surprising ways envy shows up, and why, in today's world, understanding it matters more than ever. Buckle up, because we're pulling from anthropology, psychology, even a little ancient Roman drama.
Envy isn't some modern invention. It's ancient, shaping how we've competed for resources, status, even mates, since forever.
And to kick things off, we've got a story that sounds made up, but it's totally real. Picture this. 1930s, Amazon rainforest. Young Spanish woman Helen Valero finds herself living with this indigenous tribe, the Yanomami.
Talk about culture shock.
Yeah.
The Yanomami, they're a gold mine for understanding human behavior, especially when it comes to competition.
Oh, yeah. And Helen, being the outsider, she learns quick that the women, they aren't exactly braiding friendship bracelets.
Not quite.
One day, this woman gifts Helen a packet of leaves. Seems harmless, right?
Wow.
Here's where it gets interesting.
This is a perfect example of what we call indirect aggression. A classic tactic, especially among females across species, happens when a face-to-face confrontation is just too risky.
What's the deal with the leaves? What am I missing here?
The leaves themselves, not poisonous, but the smell. Ugh, atrocious. And this woman knew Helen she'd want to give them away, which, of course, she did.
I'm guessing this doesn't end well.
And wouldn't you know it, a child in the village gets sick, claims to have eaten those leaves.
Oh, no.
Accusations fly, fingers point right at Helen. They almost ostracized her. Trying to poison a child, they said. Now imagine if a man had waltzed in and caused this kind of ruckus. Direct conflict, probably, out in the open. But this was a power move. Subtle, but potentially deadly.
That's both ingenious and terrifying at the same time.
Isn't it?
But it also makes you wonder, right? If that kind of stuff was happening back then, how's it playing out in our lives now?
A question worth asking. And it highlights why, for so long, we really misunderstood female competition, especially in humans. We picture what? Chest thumping, yelling. That's more of a male thing. But women, they're playing chess, not checkers.
And speaking of how men and women compete, we got to unpack this whole male warrior hypothesis, because that's where things get...
This theory suggests that competition between groups actually changes how men and women behave within their own group.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Imagine a sports team. Studies have shown that when men are on a team competing against another team, they actually get along better with each other. They're all in it together against this common enemy. Exactly. But for women, different story. Their competition with each other, it stays pretty constant, even when there's this big external threat.
So are we saying it's hardwired, the men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing?
This male warrior hypothesis points to evolution. For men, historically, they had to cooperate for raids, warfare, which meant trusting each other, having each other's backs.
While the guys were off fighting battles, women were in closer quarters, maybe competing more directly for resources within their own groups.
Exactly. And the thing is, that competitive spirit, that drive to stand out, it never really went away, even if the battlefield's a little different these days.
Totally. Speaking of competition and envy, let's talk about Julius Caesar. Even he struggled with this stuff.
Ah, Caesar. Talk about a guy who knew envy, both as the target and the giver, right?
The guy conquered most of the known world, but it still wasn't enough. Famously said he was jealous of Alexander the Great because Alexander did so much more, so much younger.
Classic case of never enough. It's a powerful example, even though successful people fall into this trap of comparing themselves to others. That envy led to his downfall.
Oh yeah, Brutus, the whole et tu, Brute thing.
Well, Brutus was involved, sure, but the real mastermind behind it all, that was Cassius. And apparently Cassius, he was eaten up with envy. Caesar's power, his popularity, it just drove him crazy.
Wow. Envy took down an emperor. That's intense. But it shows you the social comparison thing, it's powerful. And if it gets out of control, turns into malicious envy. Watch out.
Absolutely. That brings us to something called social comparison orientation, which is basically
how much we're constantly measuring ourselves against everybody else, right?
some people, they're always sizing up the competition, seeing where they stack up. And the thing is, it affects our everyday decisions.
Give me an example.
Imagine this. You're offered a choice. 2 weeks vacation while everyone else at work gets 1 week, or 4 weeks vacation, but everyone else gets 8. What do you choose?
Ooh, that's tricky. I think probably the four wins, even though everyone else is getting double.
That suggests you might have a lower social comparison orientation. You're thinking, maximize my time off.
Hmm.
But someone with high social comparison, they might go with the 2 weeks just to feel like they're getting more than their coworkers, even though it means less vacation overall.
So they'd give up actual benefits just to feel superior.
Shows you how powerful that need to compare can be. It's that whole comparison is the thief of joy thing.
Isn't it, though? And these days, with social media, that thief is on overdrive. Everybody's highlight reel, it's exhausting.
Totally. That's where FOMO comes in, that fear of missing out. See everyone else living your best lives, and it's hard not to feel like you're missing out.
It's engineered for maximum envy, right? Social media.
It's definitely a factor. Envy itself, it's not always a bad thing.
Really?
It's true. There's benign envy and malicious envy. Benign envy, it's, well, wow, that's amazing. I want to be able to do that too.
It's motivating.
Exactly. But malicious envy, that's the nasty stuff. That's wanting to tear the other person down.
Julius Caesar envy.
Speaking of which, it makes you wonder if any cultures have figured out how to, like, keep that kind of envy in check.
Besides not inventing social media.
Lots of societies throughout history have developed these systems for managing envy. It's called status leveling.
Status leveling, what is that?
So basically, it's redistributing resources or maybe downplaying individual achievements, all to keep things harmonious. Keep that envy from getting out of control.
How does that work? Give me an example.
Some hunter-gatherer societies, they literally swap arrows after a successful hunt. The credit, the meat, it gets shared more evenly. No one gets too big for their britches.
Wow, that's really smart. Wealth redistribution.
And there are more modern examples, too. In Denmark, they have this thing called Jante law, which is all about not thinking you're better than anyone else.
Interesting. So it's baked into their whole culture, this idea of not standing out too much. Makes you wonder if we've lost sight of that a bit, haven't we?
It's a good point. Now, speaking of cultural ways to manage envy, let's talk about the evil eye.
Ooh, yes. The evil eye. That's this idea that someone can literally harm you with an envious glance.
And it's more than just feeling jealous. It's this belief those feelings can have real-world consequences.
Almost supernatural.
Exactly. And people throughout history do all sorts of things to ward it off, like hiding their wealth, disguising their kids, wearing amulets.
It's like they're trying to be invisible to envy.
Exactly.
Are there any modern-day parallels to that?
Some argue that things like tattoos and piercings, even though we often see them as self-expression, could also be a way to deflect envy.
Interesting. Okay, we've talked about envy. But what about its weird cousin, Schadenfreude?
Yeah.
Taking pleasure in other people's misfortunes.
Ah, Schadenfreude, another fun one. It all goes back to social comparison, really.
Yeah.
We feel more Schadenfreude when someone we see as similar to us, they screw up, especially in an area we care about.
Oh, good. I'm not the only one who's terrible at parallel parking.
Exactly. It's reassuring. And the research backs this up, too. Studies have shown that students feel more Schadenfreude when someone of the same gender fails an exam, as opposed to someone of the opposite gender.
So the closer we feel to the person, the more likely we are to feel that little twinge of, at least it wasn't me.
And get this, new research is even showing a link between Schadenfreude and, wait for it, moral outrage.
Whoa! Explain that to me.
It seems counterintuitive, right? But think about it. That whole cancel culture thing, that feeling of, yeah, they messed up, they deserved it, some of that might actually be hidden Schadenfreude.
We're justifying our enjoyment of someone else's downfall by dressing it up in this moral crusade that's dark.
Really makes you think.
Yeah.
It's about understanding these emotions, how they work.
We're not all going to turn into hunter-gatherers and start swapping arrows anytime soon. So how do we deal with envy in a healthier way?
Adam Smith, the economist, had some good advice. Said that successful people should mute their trumpet.
Don't be a show-off.
Exactly. And it's not just about being considerate. Remember those stories about leaders driven by envy who end up sabotaging anyone who outshines them? Sometimes flying under the radar a bit, being successful without making a big show of it, that's the smartest move.
Better to be the head of a mouse than the tail of a lion.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought. The philosopher Bertrand Russell, he once said, "You may envy Napoleon, but Napoleon envied Caesar, Caesar envied Alexander, and Alexander envied Hercules, who never existed."
So much of our envy, it's based on comparison to things that aren't even real. We're chasing this ideal, this image, instead of just appreciating what we have, who we are.
Next time you feel that pang of envy, ask yourself, who am I really comparing myself to? Is it a person or is it this idea in my head? And is it even helpful?
Great question. Awareness, that's the first step to breaking free from envy.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those wise words. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.